My parents stole my college fund to buy my spoiled brother a Maserati. Then at my graduation, the studio CEO called my name and revealed who I chose as my real family. What would you do if your own parents stole your entire future just to buy your spoiled brother a Maserati? Mine did. And what I did next at my college graduation, on a global live broadcast, didn't just break them. It obliterated them. To truly understand the absolute chilling silence that settled in my chest the day I finally shattered my family, you have to grasp the deafening, constant noise I've lived with my entire life. Growing up in my house, it wasn't about finding your voice. It was about learning how to become utterly invisible. It meant understanding, from the moment I could form memories, that there was an unspoken, ironclad hierarchy. My older brother, Cameron, who's 27, was the undeniable golden child. He was louder, more demanding, incredibly reckless, and the absolute, unquestioned center of my parents' entire universe. Our family dining table was never just a place for meals. It was a grand stage, and Cameron was always the main act. If I brought home a report card brimming with straight A's, my parents would offer a polite nod, maybe stick it under some generic magnet on the fridge, then immediately pivot. The conversation would swing back to Cameron's latest golf lessons, or his newest, most expensive hobby. I still remember the day Cameron totaled his first car, a brand new Toyota they'd bought him, in cash. My father didn't ground him. He didn't make him pay a single dime for the massive damages. No, he patted Cameron on the back, told him accidents happen to the best of men, and then just bought him another one. Meanwhile, when I desperately needed a car to get to my grueling part-time job at a local hardware store, what did my father do? He handed me a printed city bus schedule and with a straight face told me that building character builds a man. Can you even believe it? They paid Cameron's rent when he moved into a luxury high-rise apartment downtown. They paid his credit card bills when he maxed them out on designer watches and spontaneous weekend trips to Miami. And me? I was filling out financial aid forms at 3 in the morning, praying I'd get enough grant money to cover my textbooks. I lived on a mercilessly strict budget, counting quarters just for the laundromat, terrified of missing a single overnight shift at the greasy 24-hour diner where I practically lived. The final thread of my patience didn't just snap, it was incinerated. It happened on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was standing in my cramped, overheated college apartment. The air hung thick with the smell of cheap instant noodles and stale textbook paper. I had just finished the final exam of my senior year. 4 years. 4 years of absolute soul-crushing grinding. 4 years of dealing with drunk diner customers at 3 in the morning, making a pathetic entry-level salary, all while desperately trying to keep my grades high enough to maintain my academic scholarships. I held my phone to my ear, looking at the graduation cap I'd just pulled out of its crinkly plastic wrapping. My mother was on the other end. I'd called her to finalize the logistics for the weekend. I asked what time they were planning to drive up on Saturday, warning her that campus parking would be a total nightmare, so they should probably aim for 8 a.m. There was a long, agonizing pause. I could hear the clinking of ice in a glass on her end. I could hear the faint sound of ocean waves and a television playing some daytime talk show in the background. Then came her voice, that breezy, unbothered, incredibly casual tone she always used when she was about to completely dismiss my entire existence. She told me they weren't coming. She didn't say it with regret. She didn't offer a single tearful apology. She just stated it like she was casually discussing the weather forecast. They had already booked a week-long trip to an exclusive high-end resort in the Maldives. With Cameron, I stood completely frozen. The cheap synthetic fabric of the graduation gown slipped from my numb fingers, pooling onto the scuffed linoleum floor. I asked her to repeat herself. I asked her if this was some kind of sick joke. My father got on the line, taking the phone from her. He used that deep, authoritative voice he usually reserved for dominating neighborhood association meetings and lecturing me about my life choices. He told me Cameron was under a massive amount of stress at his new corporate finance job. He said Cameron desperately needed a break, and they had found a phenomenal deal on a luxury family suite. He actually had the sheer nerve to tell me that a college graduation was just a long, boring, pointless speech anyway, and that I was mature enough to handle it on my own. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my phone against the cracked drywall. I just breathed in the stale air of my apartment, my lungs burning, and asked them, "Do you realize you're choosing a vacation over the culmination of 4 years of my blood, sweat, and tears?" I asked them if they understood that I was the first person in our immediate family to actually finish a degree without dropping out. My mother chimed back in, using the exact phrase that had been her weapon of choice since I was a child. "Elias, sweetie, you were always so independent. You will figure it out." She told me to take plenty of pictures and send them to the family group chat so they could see how handsome I looked. Then she told me she had to go pack her designer beach bag. And she hung up. The dial tone echoed in my ear like a flat line. I didn't cry. The betrayal was far too deep, too absolute for tears. It was a cold, hard clarity settling into my bones, the realization that I was utterly alone in this family. But the devastating truth was, I had always been alone. And the worst part? I had deliberately ignored the glaring flashing warning signs my entire life. I thought the worst was over. I was so incredibly, painfully wrong. The real awakening, the moment that burned the bridge to ash, happened the very next day. My cousin David, who worked as an auditor in banking, texted me. He urgently asked to meet for coffee. David was a nervous, twitchy guy, always looking over his shoulder, terrified of family drama. We met at a crowded, noisy coffee shop near the financial district. We sat down at a sticky corner table, the hissing of the espresso machines masking our conversation. He leaned across the table, his voice dropping to a harsh, frantic whisper. He looked physically sick, his face pale and drawn. He asked me how exactly I was paying for my final tuition bill. I told him I'd completely drained my meager savings and picked up double shifts at the diner. David stared down at his cardboard coffee cup. He muttered that he couldn't keep quiet anymore. The immense guilt was eating him alive from the inside out. Then he told me about the college fund. When my grandfather passed away when I was 16, he left a modest inheritance. I remembered attending the funeral, remembered the lawyer reading the will in a stuffy office. My parents had told me the inheritance went entirely toward paying off their mortgage and fixing the damaged roof of our house. That was a lie. A massive, unforgivable, diabolical lie. The money had been placed into two separate, legally designated college funds, one for Cameron, one for me. David looked me dead in the eye and confessed what he had seen in the financial statements a month ago. My parents had illegally liquidated my entire college fund, every single penny, and they didn't use it for a sudden medical emergency. They didn't use it for their retirement or a 401k. They used it to buy Cameron a brand new, custom-ordered Maserati. David said they did it because Cameron was constantly complaining about how his wealthy coworkers at his new corporate job drove luxury sports cars, and he felt horribly left out. He felt inadequate. So my parents took the money meant for my education, the money my grandfather specifically wanted me to have for my future, and they bought my spoiled, entitled, overgrown toddler of a brother a luxury vehicle, just to stroke his fragile ego. I felt the blood completely drain from my face. The buzzing in my ears was so loud I could barely hear the cafe around me. It wasn't just gross favoritism anymore. It was literal theft. It was absolute, undeniable financial sabotage. They had forced me to work until my hands bled, forced me to take on crippling debt, forced me to eat instant noodles for 4 years, while they bought a Maserati with my name on the check. I walked out of that coffee shop feeling like a completely different human being. The Elias who desperately craved his parents' approval, he died right there on the wet pavement. I was done being the good, quiet, obedient son. I was done swallowing my pride just to keep their toxic peace. They wanted me to be independent? Fine. I would show them exactly what independence looked like. I drove straight to my best friend, Leo's house. I didn't even knock. I just walked right through the front door, a privilege I'd earned after years of practically living there during high school to escape my own house. I collapsed onto their plush living room couch. Leo's father, Arthur, was sitting in his armchair reading a thick hardcover book, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. Leo's mother, Helen, was in the kitchen baking. Leo came down the stairs, saw my devastated face, and stopped dead in his tracks. I couldn't hold it in anymore. The dam finally broke. I told them absolutely everything. I laid it all out on the table. The canceled graduation, the Maldives resort trip, the sickening lies about the inheritance, the stolen college fund, the Maserati. I sat there shaking violently, my hands gripped so tightly together, my knuckles entirely white. I expected pity. I expected the awkward, uncomfortable silence people usually give when severe family trauma is dumped on their living room floor. But Arthur closed his book, set it down carefully on the coffee table, and took off his glasses. The look on his face wasn't pity. It was pure, unadulterated, protective anger. Not at me, but for me. Helen walked out of the kitchen, wiping her flour-covered hands on a dish towel. She walked over, sat right next to me on the couch, and put her arms firmly around my shaking shoulders. She didn't offer empty, useless platitudes. She didn't tell me that family is everything, or that time heals all wounds. She looked at me with a fierce, burning maternal protectiveness that I had never once experienced from my own flesh and blood. She said, "Elias, those people do not deserve to sit in those chairs. They do not deserve to watch a brilliant young man cross that stage. But we would be absolutely honored to take their place if you will have us." I looked at Arthur. He nodded firmly, his jaw set. He told me he already had his best charcoal soup pressed and ready to go. In that exact defining moment, the entire definition of family was permanently rewritten in my brain. Family wasn't blood. Blood, in that moment, meant absolutely nothing. Family was the people who showed up when you had absolutely nothing to offer them. Family was the people who vehemently defended you when you weren't even in the room. But my personal life wasn't the only intense battlefield I was fighting on. For the past 2 years, I had been working as an intern at a major film production company, quietly and obsessively writing a feature-length screenplay. It was my lifeline, my desperate exit strategy from poverty. I poured every single ounce of my pain, my severe isolation, and my burning ambition into those pages. A guy named Damon worked in the same department. Damon was a slithering snake in a designer suit. He had the kind of incredibly wealthy parents who bought his way into the industry, but he possessed zero actual creative talent. He coasted on his family's connections and routinely stole ideas from younger interns. He had been snooping around my desk for weeks, asking overly specific, probing questions about my project. 3 days before my graduation, I walked into the bustling office early. I found my manager, Marcus, a seasoned, grizzled producer with zero tolerance for corporate nonsense, standing near the main printer. Damon was standing right next to him, holding a massive, thick stack of paper. It was my script. Damon was actively pitching it to Marcus as his own completely original work. He was brazenly claiming he had spent the entire weekend polishing the third act dialogue. I felt a cold, calculated, terrifying fury wash over me. After what my parents had just done with the Maserati, I was in absolutely no mood to let another entitled, worthless parasite steal what rightfully belonged to me. I walked right up to them. I didn't yell. I didn't throw a tantrum. I looked Damon dead in the eye and calmly asked him to explain the character arcs in the third act. I asked him to detail the underlying thematic shift in scene 42. Damon stammered. He threw out some meaningless corporate buzzwords, sweating profusely under his expensive silk collar. He looked at Marcus for help. I turned to Marcus. I told him to flip to page 47 of the manuscript. I told him to read the first letter of every single line of dialogue in the main protagonist's pivotal monologue. Marcus frowned deeply. He flipped the crisp pages. His eyes scanned the text rapidly. He looked up, his jaw incredibly tight. I had meticulously hidden an acrostic in the script. It spelled out, letter by letter, debelar tedden by Elias. It was a permanent digital watermark embedded directly into the narrative structure itself. Damon turned the color of wet ash. He started stammering wildly about a misunderstanding, panicking, threatening a lawsuit, claiming his father's powerful lawyers would destroy the company for defamation. Marcus didn't even blink. He looked Damon up and down with pure, unfiltered disgust. He grabbed Damon by the arm and marched him directly down the hall to Human Resources. Diane, the HR director, did not waste time with pleasantries. Within 20 minutes, Damon was packing his desk into a sad cardboard box, while a burly security guard watched his every move. He was fired on the spot for blatant intellectual property theft. Marcus called me into his office later that afternoon. He sat behind his massive glass desk, tapping a silver pen thoughtfully. He looked at me, really, looked at me, and said my script wasn't just good, it was brilliant. He said he had secretly sent it up the chain to the top executives at the parent studio weeks ago, entirely bypassing the normal channels, and they had made a decision. A decision that was going to change my life forever. The very next morning, I was sitting in a plush, incredibly comfortable leather chair in the top-floor boardroom of the main studio. The sprawling view of the city's skyline out the floor-to-ceiling window was breathtaking, but I kept my eyes locked on the woman sitting across from me, Victoria. She was the CEO and head of production. She was a woman who commanded an entire room just by breathing. She didn't waste time with small talk. She slid a thick, legally binding contract across the polished mahogany table. The number printed on the first page made my vision literally blur. It was enough money to buy premium real estate in cash. It was enough money to never ever worry about rent, tuition, or groceries again. It was absolute, undeniable freedom. My salary as a professional lead screenwriter was officially secured. I picked up the heavy pen and signed the papers with a remarkably steady hand. Victoria smiled. It was a sharp, predatory smile of someone who knew a fantastic investment when she saw one. She leaned forward. She hadn't come first over the sound of ocean wave. Studio was actually one of the main corporate sponsors for my university. She said she was scheduled to give the keynote commencement speech at the graduation ceremony this weekend. She wanted to make a massive public announcement about the acquisition of my script right there on the stage. She wanted to show the university, the wealthy alumni network, and the press exactly what kind of raw talent they were producing. Then she handed me a small, heavy, gold-embossed card. It was a VIP guest pass for the front row of the auditorium. She told me to write down the exact names of the parents who supported me through this grueling journey so she could acknowledge them properly during the global broadcast. I looked at the blank lines on the card. I thought about the Maserati. I thought about the text message from the cabana in the Maldives. I thought about the empty, stolen college fund. I picked up the pen and I wrote 2 names in bold, clear letters: Arthur and Helen. Asterisk, Update 1. When Saturday morning finally arrived, the air was crisp, bright, and full of electricity. I slipped the heavy synthetic graduation gown over my broad shoulders. I stood in front of the cheap, warped mirror on my closet door in my cramped apartment. I looked at my reflection. I didn't look like the exhausted, beaten-down kid who worked graveyard shifts at a diner. I didn't look like the forgotten, unloved younger brother. I looked like a man who had built a towering empire out of dirt and sheer willpower. I drove to the massive auditorium in complete silence. The campus was absolutely swarming with families. Fathers were proudly carrying massive bouquets of flowers. Mothers were adjusting their sons' ties as if they were attending a presidential inauguration. Helen was wearing a beautiful, elegant floral dress, already clutching a crumpled tissue in her hand. When she saw me looking, she waved frantically, her face breaking into a massive, tearful, beautiful smile. Arthur gave me a firm, respectful nod, placing his hand directly over his heart. They were not my blood. They had no legal or biological obligation to me whatsoever. But in that moment, as the lights in the auditorium dimmed and the grand academic procession began, I knew exactly who my real family was. The storm was about to break. My parents were currently sitting in a 5-star resort in the Maldives, probably sipping expensive mimosas, complaining loudly about the Wi-Fi speed, and laughing at my expense. They thought they had gotten away with the perfect crime. They thought I was just a quiet, obedient, pathetic loser who would swallow their immense disrespect, take his little piece of paper, and fade quietly into the background of their perfect family portrait. They were about to find out exactly how deafening my silence could be. The university president stepped up to the heavy wooden podium, delivering the standard, boring, boilerplate commencement speech. He talked about the future, about the immense value of hard work. I tuned every single word out. My heart was beating a slow, steady, incredibly powerful rhythm against my ribs. After 30 minutes of endless academic rambling, the time finally came. The dean called my name. Elias. I stepped out from the shadows and under the blinding, brilliant white stage lights. The intense heat from the overhead rigs hit my face immediately. I walked across the wide stage, my footsteps completely muffled by the thick crimson carpet. I approached the dean, shook his hand firmly, took the empty leather diploma cover, and smiled for the official photographer. It was exactly what my parents expected. A quiet, obedient, unremarkable 5 seconds of screen time. I walked down the steps and returned to my seat, blending right back into the massive crowd. I imagined my mother taking her screenshot on her iPad, feeling a brief, hollow sense of duty fulfilled, closing the cover, and turning her attention right back to Cameron. But the ceremony did not end there. The dean walked back to the microphone, tapping it twice. Ladies and gentlemen, his voice boomed heavily through the massive speakers, demanding absolute silence. Before we conclude this morning's commencement, we have a very special, unprecedented announcement. We are deeply honored to welcome to the stage the CEO and head of production of one of the largest film studios in the world. Please welcome Victoria. A massive ripple of genuine confusion moved rapidly through the crowd. The heavy velvet curtains parted and Victoria walked out. She was wearing a sharp, impeccably tailored white suit, that radiated absolute authority. She carried a sleek black leather portfolio. The murmurs died down instantly. She walked straight to the podium, adjusting the microphone with a practiced hand. "Good morning," she said, her voice smooth and commanding. "I am not here to give you a speech about chasing your dreams. The film industry does not care about your dreams. We care about execution. We care about grit. We care about the rare individuals who do the grueling work when no one is watching and when no one believes in their potential." I felt a cold, electric shiver run straight down my spine. The fuse was officially lit. "A few weeks ago," Victoria continued, pacing slowly across the stage, "my studio acquired a feature-length screenplay. It is a brilliant, vicious, incredibly raw piece of writing that completely stunned our entire executive board. It was written by an intern who worked overnight shifts at a diner to pay his rent. That intern is graduating in this room today." The auditorium was dead silent. The tension was incredibly palpable. And as of yesterday morning, he is officially no longer an intern. He has been given a massive, unprecedented promotion to lead staff writer. His starting salary breaks every single record we have ever set. We didn't just buy a script. We bought a visionary career. She stopped pacing and opened her portfolio. "Elias," she said, her voice echoing powerfully. "Stand up." My chest tightened. I stood up, pushing my chair back loudly. Thousands of heads snapped around to look at me. The professional camera operators immediately swiveled their massive lenses, projecting my face onto the massive digital screens flanking the stage. I kept my expression completely neutral, staring straight back at Victoria. "Elias," she said, broadcasting to the entire world. "Behind every great writer is a foundation of support. The studio wants to publicly recognize that critical foundation." She turned directly to the VIP section. When I asked Elias who he wanted to honor today, he gave me the names of the two people who actually showed up for him. The people who proved that family is a continuous action, not a genetic entitlement. Victoria reached into her portfolio and pulled out a massive, beautifully printed ceremonial check. "To Arthur and Helen," she announced, her voice ringing with crystal clarity. "On behalf of the studio, as a special signing bonus embedded directly in Elias's contract, we would like to present you with a gratitude stipend of $750,000. The number hung suspended in the heavy air for a fraction of a second before the entire auditorium erupted into absolute, unhinged chaos. $750,000. $750,000. The crowd went completely insane. People were gasping loudly, jumping out of their seats, screaming in pure disbelief. The applause was deafening, a physical wave of sound crashing over the room. I looked down at the front row. Arthur was completely frozen, his mouth slightly open, his stoic demeanor utterly shattered. Helen had both hands clamped tightly over her mouth, tears streaming rapidly down her face, completely ruining her makeup. Victoria gestured for them to come up to the stage. Arthur took Helen's shaking hand, and they walked up the stairs, completely overwhelmed. Victoria handed the massive check to Arthur. He looked at the bold black numbers, then looked directly at me. He didn't care about the cameras. He mouthed the words clearly. "Thank you, son." That word hit me harder than the money ever could. I knew, with absolute, unwavering certainty, exactly what was happening in the Maldives. I could perfectly picture the iPad sitting on the glass table. I could picture my mother's sunburned face turning completely white, dropping her mimosa on the concrete. I could picture my father choking violently on his drink, scrambling to turn up the volume, refusing to believe his own ears. The money they worshipped above their own child, $750,000, handed over on live television to complete strangers, while they sat in a luxury resort, completely and utterly humiliated in front of the entire world. When we finally escaped the swarming crowd and made it to Arthur's car, we drove to an incredibly upscale private steakhouse to celebrate. That was when my phone started vibrating violently on the polished wooden table. Buzz, buzz, buzz. The notifications piled up rapidly. 85 missed calls in total. The texts came flooding in, layered with escalating panic, blistering rage, and sheer pathetic desperation. "Mom, Elias, what the hell was that? Who were those people on the stage? Answer me right now. Dad, pick up the phone. You are embarrassing this family on a national level. This is a sick joke, right? Cameron, bro, are you serious? $750,000? You gave it to some random neighbors instead of your own blood? Dad, I am calling my lawyer right now. You cannot do this legally. That money belongs to this family. I am owed a return on my investment for raising you. Answer the damn phone. A lawyer. My father was actually threatening to call a lawyer because I gave my own corporate signing bonus to the people who supported me. The sheer blinding entitlement was hilarious. Helen looked at the phone buzzing on the table. She told me I didn't have to answer it. I picked up the phone, flipped it face down, and picked up my menu. Later that night, sitting alone in my apartment, I opened the family group chat. I typed one single definitive message. You told me I was independent. You told me I would figure it out. I figured it out. Enjoy the Maldives. Do not ever contact me again. I hit send. And without a second of hesitation, I blocked all of their numbers. I wiped them entirely from my digital existence. Asterisk, update 2. 6 months passed. 6 months of absolute impenetrable radio silence from my end. My career exploded faster than anyone predicted. The studio put my movie into active pre-production. I bought a piece of prime real estate, a beautiful, sprawling modern mansion in a secure gated community. I set up an ironclad trust fund for Leo's future children. I was living the exact life my parents had always desperately dreamed of for Cameron. But I had built it with my own 2 hands. But karma is a relentless predator, and it has a phenomenal sense of smell for hypocrisy. It was a gray, rainy Tuesday afternoon when the security guard at my studio called up to my private office. He said there was an older woman in the lobby aggressively demanding to see me, crying hysterically, claiming it was a life-or-death family emergency. I told the guard to send her up, but to keep a uniformed security escort right beside her. The elevator doors opened and Aunt Martha stepped out. She looked absolutely terrible. Her suffocating lavender perfume couldn't mask the sour smell of stale stress. Her expensive clothes were wrinkled, and she was clutching her designer handbag like a life preserver. She collapsed into the leather chair across from my massive oak desk and started crying violently. "Elias," she sobbed, struggling to catch her breath. "You have to help them. They are going to lose absolutely everything." I leaned back slowly in my ergonomic chair. I didn't offer her a tissue. I just folded my hands and stared at her with cold detachment. "Explain," I said flatly. The ugly truth came spilling out like toxic waste. "Remember Cameron's supposedly high-stress corporate finance job? The one that required a Maldives vacation and a brand new Maserati to manage his delicate anxiety? It was a massive criminal sham. Cameron wasn't stressed because of the heavy workload. He was stressed because he was actively, deliberately embezzling millions of dollars from his employer. He had been running a highly sophisticated, fraudulent expense account scheme to fund his lavish lifestyle. 2 months after my graduation, the corporate auditors finally caught him red-handed. The fallout was catastrophic. His company fired him on the spot, escorted him out with the police, and filed a massive multi-million-dollar civil lawsuit against him. The federal investigators froze all his assets. His beautiful wife immediately filed for divorce, demanded full custody of their child, and sued for brutal alimony. Cameron's life was destroyed in a matter of days. But Cameron was a coward. He ran crying straight back to Mommy and Daddy. My parents panicked. They remortgaged their house to the absolute maximum limit. They drained every single penny of their retirement accounts to pay for his high-powered defense lawyers, hoping to settle quietly. "And?" I asked, looking at my expensive watch. "He lost." Martha whispered, her voice cracking in pure despair. The judge ordered massive restitution. The bank immediately repossessed the Maserati. Now, the bank is foreclosing on my parents' house. The real estate market had dipped and they were completely underwater. They are meeting with a bankruptcy attorney tomorrow. The stolen inheritance, their savings, the house, it was all completely gone. "They have nowhere to go, Elias." Martha begged, leaning dangerously far across my desk. "They just need a loan, just a fraction of what you gave to those strangers. You are blood. You owe them." I picked up my silver pen, tapped it twice on the glass surface of my desk, and looked her dead in the eye. "I owe them exactly what they gave me," I said, my voice echoing coldly in the large room. "Nothing. Security will escort you out now." 3 days later, the final, inevitable confrontation happened. I was walking out of my office building late in the evening, heading toward the private underground parking garage. The rain had left the pavement slick and black. Standing near the entrance, shivering slightly in a cheap, thin windbreaker, was my father, Richard. The man who used to strut around judging everyone else's lives looked 10 years older. His broad shoulders were slumped, his face heavily lined by the crushing weight of absolute financial ruin. When he saw me, he stepped out of the shadows, trying desperately to muster up that old authoritative tone. "Elias," he said, his voice cracking. "Stop right there. We need to talk. You ignored your aunt. You are turning your back on your own family in our darkest hour. We put a roof over your head. We fed you for 18 years. You met the absolute bare minimum legal baseline for keeping a child alive," I replied, my voice dangerously steady. "Congratulations on not going to jail for child neglect. Do you want a medal?" He flinched physically. "Cameron made a mistake. He is your brother. We are losing the house, Elias. We are going to be on the street. You have millions of dollars now. You cannot just leave us to rot." "Watch me," I said, staring unblinkingly into his eyes. He realized begging wasn't working. So he reverted to his true nature. "If you walk away right now," he spat, his face turning a blotchy red, "I will call the press. I will tell the tabloids exactly how the great successful writer treats his own flesh and blood. I will ruin your reputation. My lawyer will." I cut him off with a genuine, relaxed laugh. "Your lawyer? The lawyer you can't even afford to pay because you spent your entire retirement defending a convicted felon? Go ahead, Richard. Call the press. Tell them exactly how you deliberately stole my college fund to buy a luxury Maserati for an embezzler. Tell them how you skipped my graduation to drink in the Maldives while I stood alone. My PR team will have an absolute field day with it. It will make a great underdog story for my next movie." He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The realization of his total, pathetic powerlessness finally crashed down on him. "And just so we are completely clear," I continued, stepping closer, forcing him to look up at me, "my legal team already has a comprehensive restraining order drafted and ready to file. If you, your wife, or your criminal son ever step foot near my property, my office, or my real family ever again, I will bury you in so much aggressive litigation that you won't even be able to afford a cardboard box to sleep in. Do you understand me?" He didn't answer. He just stared at the wet pavement. I stepped around him, got into my car, and drove away, leaving him standing alone in the cold, damp parking lot, a broken man in the ruins of his own making. A few months later, it was Thanksgiving. Inside my sprawling new mansion, the massive, marble, kitchen island was covered in trays of stuffing and fresh rolls. Leo was laughing loudly at the long dining table, pouring vintage red wine into crystal glasses. Arthur was carving a massive turkey, and Helen was tasting the gravy, humming softly to herself. There was no underlying tension. There were no hidden agendas or walking on eggshells. There was just warmth. When we all sat down, Arthur raised his glass. His eyes were shining with genuine emotion. "To family," he said simply. "The one we choose, and the one that chooses us back." We clinked our glasses together. I realized then that the intense trauma of my past wasn't a life sentence. I had dug myself out of the suffocating grave my parents had built for me, and I built something beautiful, real, and unbreakable in its place. Have you ever faced a betrayal that forced you to completely redefine what family means? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below.